Today was Friday, the preparation day. But for me, it was like the first day of my new life. Today I went public as a follower of Jesus the Messiah, the only Messiah, the Son of God, the creator and sustainer of all life, the one whose Father sent him to earth to find me, Nicodemus, Pharisee, member of the Sanhedrin, lost sinner, needing to be found. Early this morning, I learned that the high priest had called a nighttime meeting of the Sanhedrin, an illegal meeting, and it was more than just calling the assembly at night. He also left two of us off the list of invitees, myself and Joseph of Arimathea. Both of us have questioned our leader's attitude toward Jesus. Both Annas and Caiaphas hate him so much that sometimes I think they fear he has come to steal their own priestly robes. It's a violent hatred, one that often boils with malice worthy of a Roman centurion in a battle with a gladiator. I was there one day in the court of the temple when Jesus came in, saw what was happening, the money changers, the sellers of sheep, the sellers of this and that and everything else. Jesus' fury was unbelievable. He reached down and found a bunch of cords, picked them up, and in the next few minutes, he absolutely chased everyone. Well, all the salespeople and thieves out of the court of the temple. He looked at Annas and Caiaphas and Malchus and the others and said, "You have turned my father's house into a den of thieves." Maybe that's part of why they hate him so much. The nighttime meeting of the Sanhedrin was all about Jesus. Malchus, the high priest's advisor, had bribed a man from Jesus' inner circle, one Judas Iscariot, a lover of silver, gold, and power, they say, to betray his master as a criminal who blasphemes Yahweh. Judas kissed him in Gethsemane, right near the place where I had found him on that night 2 years ago. That brought Malchus and the temple guard racing from the shadows. And one of the Galileans, they say, flung his sword in protection and sliced an ear off the old conniver Malchus. At first I thought that was truly funny. Old Malchus is worse than Ahithophel was in the palace of King David. Smart, sly, cunning, and slippery. Well, obviously, Jesus disagreed with my assessment, for he reached down, found the severed ear, brushed off the dirt and blood, and reattached it to the demon's head. I would have cut off the other ear also. Not Jesus. The love he described to me cuts through even the ugliest of his enemies. Imagine placing his messianic hand on that quivering, filthy flesh and then putting it back in the rightful place on his most dangerous enemy. Only love would do that. The Sanhedrin, short two of its most vocal members, condemned Jesus to death and took him over to Pilate's judgment hall so Caesar's hand could sign the decree. Somehow, King Herod also managed to get into the act. Not sure of all the details about how that happened, but I caught up with the day just as Pilate was washing his hands and the people were screaming for blood. Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. It's a chant that will last in my mind forever. Even though that chant was started by ruffians hired by Malchus, it quickly swelled into a roar of hatred. A hatred so hot that I felt the fires of hell scorching the air. A demonic spirit took over the people of Jerusalem that day, and it had all gone too far for either Joseph or me to have any impact on what was happening. We met beside a vegetable stand. "I have a tomb," Joseph whispered. "I have one also," I responded. "Yes, Nicodemus, but mine is closer to Golgotha, where he will be crucified. I can get to Pilate, and I will ask permission to place the body of Jesus in the sepulcher of Arimathea. See what you can do about spices. I ran, fleeing through several back alleys, searching for spices and oils worthy of embalming a Messiah. Jesus would deserve the best. Running, for an old man like me, was a chore beyond pain, especially in the mortuary district, where tiny streets curl around vats of boiling messes that just pound your head with the smell of death. It was not something I want to do again. I have never dealt closely with death and had no idea what spices to buy or how much. An ancient woman attending one of the shops said, "Who died?" I told her that God was about to die and deserved the finest burial since King David. She laughed at my pain and suggested myrrh, aloes, nard, and a variety of other expensive embalming spices that would be necessary. About 30 pounds heavy, she said. You'll especially need spikenard. If it's a king who's dying, then nard it is. Did you know, man? King David sprinkled spikenard on his beard 3 or 4 times each day. It's definitely the spice of a king, a fragrance that speaks royalty and promises new life. I ordered 75 pounds, and she filled a bag till it overflowed. And then she added several long strips of white linen grave cloth, tied it all off, charged me enough money to rebuild a temple for Jesus, the one who taught me about love, the king who came all the way to Jerusalem to find me. It was enough. I would have paid double if she'd asked. The bag felt like feathers on my shoulder as I sprinted around the corners, back down the steps, through the gate, into the Kidron Valley, up the steep cliff toward Golgotha, shoving aside bloodthirsty Passover mobs as I ran. The quake came long before I topped the hill, rattling my knees and collapsing me onto the stones. By the time I got to the crosses, it was over. Joseph was there, arguing with a distraught centurion. The terrified soldier finally accepted the writ from Pilate as genuine and shouted for several of his soldiers to get the dead king down and give him to this man and his friend. I will be forever haunted by the centurion's eyes. They were wide, staring, trembling. He looked as if he had been staring God in the face and kept mumbling that maybe he'd killed the wrong man. They dropped his body beside us and sprinted home toward their garrison. His hands were mangled, beaten and broken and caked with blood. The hands that had calmed storms and raised the dead were now hardly even recognizable as human. His feet were the same, purple, swollen from the weight of his crucified body, punctured and torn, twisted. Feet that had walked in the Jordan with John the Baptizer. Feet that stood toe-to-toe with scribes and lawyers. Feet that had been washed by Mary's spikenard. Now crushed, cold. What can I say about his body? Naked, stripped of all dignity, now just human, empty of breath like all of us will one day become. Eyes without light, dark. God's Son in shredded skin. Joseph and I wrapped him gently in the strips of linen the old woman had provided. We'd never done anything like this before, and we found it difficult to wrap the body and the spices together, but finally we succeeded. And then we, Joseph and I, lifted the weight of the Messiah in our arms and carried him to the sepulchre of Arimathea. It was late. Sabbath had already arrived. Impossible for us to complete the embalming process in a legal and appropriate manner. So we laid him in the empty niche on the stone slab Joseph had purchased for himself. We made sure the spices were placed safely, walked outside, slid the stone door closed, and then we came home to wait for the day after Sabbath when we could complete our task. What more can I say? He came to find me. I let him die. Today, the Messiah was destroyed by those who hate love. There is weeping in heaven and cheering in hell. Yet in the tomb, even as my arms laid his broken body on the stone slab, I felt a stirring of hope in my chest. Jesus spoke often of his own coming death. Sacrifice, he called it. But he never spoke of it with fear. Maybe Jesus saw death as the beginning of new life, as the ushering in of something wondrous, something better, far better, something everlasting. Probably I should take a warm bath. I should actually just go to bed, but my racing mind has no brakes. Besides, there remains an enchanting fragrance of unused spikenard, the fragrance